2026 did not begin with explosions or sirens. It began with strain. Reservoirs across continents fell to historic lows. Coastal cities reinforced barriers against rising tides that came earlier each year. Markets trembled at rumors of shortages. News cycles repeated the same phrases: instability, uncertainty, systemic risk. People stopped arguing about whether something was wrong and started asking how long they had left before it broke completely. It was not a single catastrophe. It was a slow tightening. In southern Italy, along a rugged coastline near Bari, a fisherman named Luca rose before dawn as he had for 3 decades. The sea had been violent all week, waves battering the harbor walls and shredding nets. The sky that morning hung low and metallic, heavy with unresolved storm. As Luca stepped onto the rocks to inspect the tide, he noticed someone standing farther out along the edge. A woman. She stood barefoot on the dark stone, facing the horizon. Her garment was pale but simple, moving gently in the wind. She did not brace against the gusts. She did not appear concerned by the rising surf. There was nothing theatrical about her presence. No light, no sound, no spectacle. Yet the water around her was different. The waves that crashed against the pier rolled toward her and softened. Foam settled instead of exploding upward. A narrow circle of calm formed in the churning sea. Luca rubbed his eyes. The storm had not ended. He could still see its fury beyond her. But around her, the water bent into stillness. He took a cautious step closer. That was when she moved. Not dramatically, not triumphantly. She stepped forward, and her foot did not sink. The sea held her. Luca would later struggle to describe what he saw. He would insist she did not walk like in a story, but as though the water had become firm beneath her, just enough to carry her weight. She moved only a few paces. Then she turned her head slightly, as if acknowledging him. He felt no terror, only a strange and immediate peace. Within hours, meteorological reports shifted. The storm system weakened unexpectedly. Satellite imagery showed an unusual pressure break forming off the coast. By midday, the violent winds had eased. Fishing boats returned cautiously to open water. Experts called it a rare atmospheric correction. Lucas said nothing. But 3 days later, when international headlines began reporting similar accounts, from Manila, from Recife, from the coast of Morocco, he realized his silence would not last. In the Philippines, a typhoon had flooded entire districts of Manila. Survivors told rescue workers about a woman who moved through waist-high water, guiding children toward rooftops moments before walls collapsed. In Brazil, farmers spoke of a stranger who urged them to harvest early, just days before an unprecedented frost. In Nairobi, hospital staff described a calm visitor who walked through a pediatric ward hours before a failing backup generator unexpectedly restarted. The descriptions were consistent. Dark hair, simple garment, unshaken composure. She never stayed long. She never asked for recognition. And she never explained herself. Social media erupted with speculation. Skeptics dismissed it as collective stress under global pressure. Religious communities spoke more cautiously. The Vatican released a brief statement urging prayer and discernment, neither confirming nor denying the reports. But one phrase began to circulate among believers across continents. The mother has returned. As summer deepened, scientific agencies issued a warning more alarming than any storm. A massive solar event, stronger than any in a century, was projected to strike Earth in early September. The predicted geomagnetic surge could disable satellites, cripple power grids, and silence global communication systems. Hospitals prepared contingency plans. Governments issued emergency advisories. Financial markets reacted violently. And in quiet churches, in crowded apartments, in rural villages and city towers, people began whispering the same prayer. If you are truly here, help us. No thunder followed. No immediate answer came. But somewhere beyond the atmosphere, the sun moved toward its most volatile breath. And across the world, millions waited. The typhoon that struck Manila did not give warnings the poor could afford. Rain fell in violent sheets for 36 hours. Drainage systems failed. Entire neighborhoods dissolved into brown water. Power lines snapped like thread. Families climbed onto rooftops with whatever they could carry: children, documents sealed in plastic bags, hope. Rescue crews were overwhelmed before they deployed. It was in the district of Tonda that the first clear account emerged. A grandmother named Rosa later told reporters that the water had reached her chest when she heard knocking on her metal gate. She assumed it was debris striking the frame. Instead, she saw a woman standing calmly in the current. The water that had been rushing violently down the alley slowed around her legs. "Come," the woman said gently. Rosa insisted the stranger did not shout over the wind. She did not need to. Her voice carried without strain. The woman moved ahead through the flood. Rosa followed, holding her two grandchildren close. The current tugged at their bodies, but where the stranger stepped, footing seemed firmer, as though the street beneath the water had risen slightly to meet them. They reached a staircase leading to higher ground just moments before the outer wall of their house collapsed. When rescue workers arrived at dawn, they found Rosa and the children safe on a rooftop. The woman was gone. By midweek, similar stories emerged across the city. A group of teenage boys described being guided toward an abandoned bus elevated above the floodplain. A pregnant woman claimed a stranger led her through waist-deep water to a clinic that somehow still had power. Authorities dismissed the reports as stress hallucinations, but no one could explain the pattern. The accounts were not chaotic. They were consistent. Simple garment, calm presence, unmistakable compassion. Across the globe, other crises deepened. In Nairobi, rolling blackouts threatened hospital wards during an intense heatwave. One evening, just before a total generator failure, nurses reported a woman walking quietly between incubators in the pediatric unit. She touched the forehead of a premature infant, then paused beside the main electrical panel. Moments later, an auxiliary power relay activated. A system engineers had declared inoperable weeks earlier. The surge held long enough for technicians to stabilize the grid. They found no mechanical explanation. In Brazil, meteorologists predicted a late-season frost that would devastate soybean fields across Parana. A small group of farmers harvested early after a stranger urged them not to wait. Their neighbors laughed. The frost arrived 3 days later. Entire crops were lost, except theirs. By late August, the phenomenon could no longer be ignored. International news networks ran cautious segments about the woman of 2026. Religious leaders urged discernment. Scientists demanded verifiable data. Governments quietly monitored gatherings that began forming in public squares. Because something else had begun happening. People were stepping outside at night. Not to protest. Not to riot. To pray. It started in small clusters. 10 people outside a chapel in Krakow. 20 families in a São Paulo neighborhood courtyard. But within weeks, thousands gathered in silence under open skies. No one organized it. No single message spread. And yet the instinct was shared. Then came the official announcement that silenced the noise. A solar storm, classified as extreme, was projected to strike Earth on September 18th. Satellite operators warned of cascading failures. Experts predicted prolonged power outages across multiple continents. Water treatment facilities, hospitals, banking systems, all vulnerable. The predicted impact window was narrow but catastrophic. The phrase global blackout entered headlines. For the first time in modern history, humanity faced a threat not from war or politics, but from the sun itself. In Rome, St. Peter's Square filled quietly each evening. In Manila, candles lined flooded sidewalks. In Chicago, families stood on apartment rooftops. In Nairobi, hospital staff prayed between shifts. The Vatican issued a more direct statement now. If these reports are genuine, their fruit will be conversion, humility, and charity. The solar storm intensified as predicted. Satellites tracked it in real time. A violent eruption racing through space, carrying charged particles capable of overwhelming the planet's magnetic defenses. September 18th approached. Power companies braced for collapse. Airlines grounded flights. Governments activated emergency protocols. And across the world, at almost the same hour, without coordination, millions felt the same quiet prompting. Go outside. The sky that night was unnaturally clear. And somewhere above the darkened cities, something waited. September 18th arrived without spectacle. There were no sirens. No countdown broadcast across screens. Most communication satellites had already been placed in protective mode. Power companies reduced load across major grids, bracing for the impact experts said could rival the Great Solar Storm of 1859. The sun had already released its violence. Now the charged wave was approaching Earth. In Houston, Engineers sat in darkened control rooms watching magnetic readings fluctuate. In Tokyo, technicians monitored satellite telemetry in near silence. In Berlin, emergency generators hummed beneath hospital floors. And across continents, something else unfolded. In Sao Paulo, families stepped onto balconies. In Nairobi, nurses walked outside hospital entrances. In Krakow, thousands gathered in the square before the cathedral. In Manila, flood-scarred streets filled again, this time with candles. No one commanded them. No central broadcast directed them. But millions later described the same inner movement. Not fear, not panic, but a steady urge. Pray. At 21:43 Universal Time Coordinated, geomagnetic sensors recorded the first impact. Auroras bloomed across latitudes where they had never been seen before, violet curtains stretching over Mexico, green arcs visible in northern Africa. The sky shimmered unnaturally, beautiful and unsettling. Electrical systems trembled. Power flickered in parts of Canada. Communications glitched in South America. Air traffic control systems switched to emergency protocols. And then, witnesses began reporting her again. In New York, several hundred people standing in Central Park saw a figure at the edge of the Great Lawn. She was not elevated, not surrounded by light. She stood as one of them, but the air around her seemed impossibly still despite the electric tension in the sky. In Warsaw, a group gathered near the Vistula River described seeing a woman standing near the waterline, hands open toward the horizon where the aurora pulsed. In Nairobi, hospital staff exiting the building paused as a woman walked calmly across the courtyard and looked upward. The descriptions aligned with those from Italy and Manila. Dark hair, simple garment, unshaken calm. She did not speak loudly. Most witnesses later said they heard nothing with their ears. But within them, they felt words form with clarity. You are not alone. As the geomagnetic surge intensified, global monitoring stations predicted cascading transformer failures. Several regions reported brief grid collapses. But something unexpected happened. The peak amplitude weakened. Scientists would later debate whether Earth's magnetosphere absorbed more of the shock than anticipated, or whether the storm's trajectory shifted slightly at the final approach. Data would show anomalies, subtle deviations in expected impact density. Instead of catastrophic collapse, systems strained and held. Satellites lost minor functions, but did not disintegrate. Hospitals switched to backup power, but did not go dark. Water systems flickered, but continued pumping. By 2310 Universal Time Coordinated, the worst projections had not materialized. Control rooms across the world erupted, not in celebration, but in disbelief. Engineers recalculated. Astrophysicists revised real-time models. News anchors cautiously reported that the impact appeared less severe than predicted. But something else was happening in the streets. People were still praying. In Rome, St. Peter's Square had filled with thousands kneeling in silence. In Mexico City, entire neighborhoods stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the glowing sky. In Beirut, Muslims and Christians stood side by side, heads bowed. And in dozens of cities, witnesses described seeing her one last time that night. She did not command the storm. She did not raise her hands to stop it. She prayed, and the world prayed with her. Shortly after midnight, geomagnetic readings stabilized. The solar storm passed. The blackout never came. Scientists would call it an extraordinary near miss. A fortunate magnetic deflection. A statistical anomaly. But in living rooms and hospital corridors, in refugee camps and government offices, something irreversible had shifted. The crisis had not destroyed humanity. It had united it, if only for a night. And somewhere beyond the aurora-lit sky, the charged particles faded into space. The world remained lit. When the sun quieted, the world did not erupt in celebration. It exhaled. Governments held emergency briefings the next morning. Scientists released cautious statements explaining that Earth's magnetic field had performed within resilient parameters. Power companies confirmed localized outages, but no systemic collapse. Financial markets reopened slowly, as if unsure whether to trust their own survival. The catastrophe had been predicted with precision, and yet it had not arrived. Across continents, something deeper than relief lingered. In Rome, a journalist asked a cardinal whether the church would formally declare the apparitions authentic. The response was careful. The church does not rush where heaven moves slowly. Investigations began quietly. Testimonies recorded, locations verified, timelines compared. The patterns were undeniable. Every appearance had occurred near crisis. Every message had been consistent. No demands for spectacle. No new doctrine. No threats. Only one call. You are forgetting how to love. The phrase surfaced again and again in witness accounts, sometimes heard aloud, sometimes impressed inwardly with startling clarity. It was not apocalyptic. It was corrective. In Manila, volunteers who had once competed for limited resources began organizing shared supply networks between neighborhoods. In Nairobi, hospital administrators redirected emergency funds toward rural clinics previously overlooked. In Sao Paulo, farmers who had been spared frost donated surplus crops to communities that had not been. The changes were not miraculous in the theatrical sense. They were deliberate, and they multiplied. Political leaders who had refused climate negotiations for years reopened discussions within weeks. International debt relief programs accelerated. Rival nations scheduled direct talks without cameras present. Analysts credited public pressure. Believers credited something else. Through October and November, scattered reports of the woman continued, though less frequently. She appeared in wildfire zones in California, walking calmly along containment lines before winds unexpectedly shifted. She was seen in a refugee camp in northern Syria, sitting beside a grieving mother without speaking. She stood in a snow-covered field outside Krakow one evening at dusk, witnessed only by a group of children returning home from school. Each time, she did not linger. She did not establish shrines. She left no object behind, only a steadiness in those who saw her. By December, the reports ceased. The Vatican released a statement that neither confirmed nor denied supernatural intervention, but acknowledged extraordinary spiritual fruit emerging from a global moment of repentance and solidarity. Scientists published papers analyzing the solar storm's deviation. Some argued the magnetosphere behaved within rare but explainable margins. Others admitted the storm's weakening lacked full modeling clarity. History would debate the mechanics, but people remembered the feeling. In early winter, Luca returned to the same coastline in Bari where he had first seen her. The sea was calm now, reflecting a pale sky. He stood on the rocks and waited. Nothing happened. No figure appeared. No voice spoke. And yet he did not feel abandoned, because the message had not required her continued presence. Churches were still fuller than they had been in years. Community centers reported record volunteer participation. Social trust, once frayed, showed fragile signs of repair. The world had not become paradise. Storms still came. Conflicts still flared. Human weakness remained. But something irreversible had occurred on September 18th. Humanity had looked upward together. And for one night, it had remembered humility. In a small parish in Poland, a child who claimed to have seen her in the snow was asked what she had said. The child answered simply, "She told us to take care of each other." There were no final apparitions after that. No closing spectacle. No trumpet in the sky. Only the quiet understanding that the mother who once stood beneath a cross had stood again, not to prevent every suffering, but to prevent a greater one born of division. The global catastrophe that experts had feared did not erase civilization. Instead, it revealed how close it had come. And in that narrow margin between collapse and continuation, many believed a prayer had been heard. Not shouted, not imposed, whispered. And the world, for a moment, had listened.